The Department of Justice on pace to prosecute the most firearms cases since 2005. And as our next guest points out, it's all while respecting the rights of legal gun owners. Joining us right now is the Executive Director of the NRA's Institute for Legislative Action. We're talking about Chris Cox. Chris, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you. So what is President Trump doing that President Obama did not?
Well, look, nobody wants to turn on their TV in the morning and hear about another record-breaking week for murders in Chicago or more violent crime in cities like Baltimore. What we saw for 8 years under President Obama was the opposite approach of let's decrease prosecutions intentionally of criminals caught with firearms. Let's turn our back on law enforcement in a way that should forever stain his legacy. And let's try to blame law-abiding gun owners every time some murderer goes out and kills someone. It didn't work. It didn't keep cities safe. And thankfully, under President Trump's leadership, we're seeing a fundamental change in the culture on how we deal with criminals. As you mentioned, prosecutions up 23%, standing shoulder to shoulder with law enforcement the way a president should, and supporting the rights of law-abiding gun owners. Look, these aren't mutually exclusive ideas. They're supported by the overwhelming majority of the American people. And more importantly, they're going to save lives. And that's ultimately the measurement of any of these crime control programs.
Well, Chris, it's clear that when he was running for president, Donald Trump said, look, you make me president of the United States and I'll do something about the flood of illegal guns in this country. But explain to me, because I don't quite get this part, why wouldn't the Obama administration crack down on guns that are illegally owned? Well, what's the logic in that?
Well, there is no logic, and the sad truth is that it was all about politics. You know, this was the ultimate community organizer, organized these communities to push his political career and then continue to organize these communities to push his political agenda. The sad truth is that nearly 4,000 people were murdered in his hometown during his presidency. Had he taken the approach of the leadership of Donald Trump and Attorney General Sessions and General Flynn on cracking down on criminals who misuse firearms, there'd be people alive today who aren't. That's a real tragedy, and really it should forever stain his legacy.
Chris, prosecutions for certain federal gun crimes dropped 40% while President Obama was in office, yet his administration routinely tried to take away the Second Amendment rights from law-abiding gun owners. What do you mean by that?
Well, it means that if you look at all the federal jurisdictions, Chicago ranked either last or next to last on the prosecution of criminals misusing firearms. At the same time, because it was an illogical approach to solving crime, he pushed his gun control agenda. As Rahm Emanuel said, never let a crisis go to waste. So instead of dealing with the underlying problems, what this last president did was try to shoulder the burden of his failed policies on law-abiding gun owners, and the National Rifle Association fought back every day. We continue to do that when the left media tries to support the politicians who want to take that approach. And Donald Trump, thanks to his leadership, is doing something about this underlying problem. It's going to make these cities safe, and it's going to save lives.
Chris, isn't Chicago Exhibit A, though, that more gun controls aren't needed? Because when you look at cities across the country, for instance, New York, Chicago, they've got more gun controls than any other cities, and yet in Chicago, it's a terrible problem.
Well, it's important to realize what gun control is. Gun control is this idea that if you impose these restrictions on all law-abiding Americans, criminals will somehow start to obey the law when, by definition, they break the law. Crime control, and what the president is doing, is focusing on those individuals who are out in Chicago, out in Washington, D.C., out in Baltimore, and these other cities where NRA members live and want to live in safe communities, and actually going after the underlying problem. That's how you deal with crime in this country, not by trying to take away the rights of law-abiding people.
Well, it's good to know that the government is finally cracking down. Chris Cox from the NRA. Sir, thank you very much.
Thank you.